Hello, friends, and welcome back. Today I want to tell you a story about mercy and how it survives, even when the world is nothing but dust. Because even after the land has been scorched bare, a single human heart can still remember how to offer water. The year was 1874. This was the New Mexico territory, a place baked hard by the sun and forgotten by rain. The prairie had faded to the pale gray of old bone, cracked and lifeless. The wind burned as it moved, sliding through tall grass, carrying the taste of ash and the sound of prayers long abandoned. Mae Rowan had stopped counting summers after her husband died. Grief no longer followed dates, it lived instead, in the groan of the windmill, the frayed well rope, and the heavy silence that pressed down harder each year. She was 38 still, strong from work that never paused, hauling water, fixing fence rails, keeping alive whatever the drought had not yet claimed. Every morning she rose before first light, lowering a bucket into the cracked well, careful not to waste even a drop. The water came up cloudy and warm, but it was precious, the only thing that still caught the sunlight, with something like hope. Her father, Caleb Rowan, spent most days on the porch, eyes fixed on fields that no longer answered back. Once he had been a proud soldier, broad-shouldered, full of talk about duty and God. But the war had ended, the crops had failed, and faith had gone quiet. He rarely spoke now, and when he did, his words came slow and sharp, like an old hymn remembered wrong. Mae had learned to live with that silence, the kind that doesn't ask for comfort. She kept to her work, her memories, and the stubborn rhythm of survival. Sometimes when the wind softened, she caught herself humming a tune her mother, Sarah Rowan, used to sing during long nights. She always stopped herself. Out here, even music felt like waste. The land had turned its back on them. The cattle were gone. The well was sinking lower each month. Even the sky seemed to hold its breath. In her journal, Mae once wrote, "Some years, the land forgets how to be kind. When that happens, you either harden like stone or shatter like glass." That morning felt no different. The air was dry heat already lifting from the ground. Her back ached as she leaned into the well handle, pulling the bucket up inch by inch. The rope burned her palms. Her muscles trembled. The slosh of water sounded almost like music. She poured a little into her canteen and began the long walk back across the pasture. Dust clung to her dress. The earth cracked beneath her boots. Loneliness settled into her bones, the kind that never leaves when night falls. Halfway home she stopped. Something lay ahead, a dark shape in the sagebrush, half hidden by shifting light. At first she thought it was an animal, maybe a steer that hadn't survived the heat. Then it moved. She shaded her eyes. It was a man. He lay face down, one arm pinned beneath him, the other stretched forward as if he'd been reaching for something that never came. His shirt was torn. His skin was burned raw by the sun. Around his wrists, deep red marks showed where chains had bitten into flesh. Mae's breath caught. She knew the stories every settler did. Tales of Apache prisoners escaping army camps to the south. Killers, thieves, men who vanished into the desert after bloodshed. Her father's voice echoed in her head. If you see one, don't stop, don't speak, don't even pray. Mercy aimed the wrong way can hang you just as fast as sin. She stood frozen, caught between fear and something else. Something older, quieter. The man's fingers twitched against the dust as if he were still fighting to stay alive. Mae Rowan lowered herself to her knees. With every inch she closed, his suffering became clearer. Lips split and chalk-dry, breath thin, but still clinging. He wasn't a rumor anymore. He was a man, scorched by the same sun that burned her fields, beaten down by the same sky. Mae slid the canteen from her hip and paused. One swallow might decide whether either of them lived. She twisted the cap free. "Sir," she breathed, barely louder than the wind. "Can you hear me?" No reply. She tipped the canteen to his mouth. He drank hard, desperate coughing, spilling water down his chin. When he lifted his head, his eyes opened dark, unfocused, the color of wet earth after rain. Their gaze locked for a single heartbeat. That was enough. Something crossed the space between them. No words, no shared language, something older than both. Behind her, a voice cracked the air. Mae. She spun. Caleb Rowan was coming fast, rifle slung over his shoulder, his shape cutting through the heat haze. "What in God's name are you doing?" he shouted. Then he saw the man at her feet and stopped cold. The color drained from his face. "Step away, Mae. He's dying, Pa. Step away." The edge in his voice was the one soldiers used before pulling a trigger. "That's an Apache." The word fell between them like a verdict. Mae looked down again. She didn't need the lesson. The copper skin, the black hair, the scars told her enough. But she also saw what her father wouldn't. "He's still a man," she said quietly. Caleb's jaw locked. "You don't know what you're saying. You help him, and they'll hang you right beside him." "They'd hang me for giving water," she answered. "And you for mercy aimed the wrong way." He spat into the dirt, turned and walked back toward the house. Mae stayed. Heat pressed down like punishment. The man moaned, reaching again for the canteen. She remembered another day, years before her mother. Sarah Rowan collapsed along a wagon trail, lips swollen and split, whispering for water that never came. Travelers had passed by afraid of sickness. "Keep walking," they'd said. "You can't save everyone." Maybe not, Mae thought. But maybe I can save one. She bent and poured the last drops across his mouth and chose. Far-off thunder murmured in the hills, promise or warning. "Mercy isn't safe," she whispered to herself. "But it's still mercy." Under the dying sun of a merciless land, the story truly began. That night, the wind carried the scent of rain, but the clouds only pretended. It had been too long since the earth remembered kindness. Mae stood at the window watching the horizon bruise with thunder, her father's words still ringing. "Leave him, Mae. You're feeding the devil. He'll come for your soul next." But she couldn't forget the man's eyes. They weren't a devil's. They were the eyes of someone who'd crawled through hell just to keep breathing. Caleb Rowan went to bed with his rifle by the door as always. The old boards creaked like a warning. Mae lit her lantern, wrapped her shawl tight, and stepped into the night. Rain began, not a downpour, but a hard, mean drizzle, enough to slick the dirt beneath her boots. The prairie lay black and endless. Lightning flickered along the hills. For a single heartbeat, the world looked carved from bone. She found him where she had left him, half conscious, half slipping away. The wind had buried him in dust again, as if the land itself were trying to pull him back. When Mae Rowan knelt beside him, his lips moved, but no sound followed. His skin burned with fever. His breathing came shallow and thin. "You shouldn't still be alive," she whispered. Then softer. "Neither should I." She slid her arms beneath his shoulders. He was heavy, far too heavy, but she didn't stop. Every step toward the house was a fight. Her dress soaked through, her hair stuck to her face. Her heart slammed against her ribs. By the time she reached the back door, she could hear her father's snoring through the wall, deep and ragged, the kind of sleep shaped by whiskey and bitterness. Behind the kitchen sat the old root cellar, half buried in the ground. Caleb Rowan hadn't used it in years. Said there was nothing left worth saving. Mae lifted the latch. Cool, earthy air rushed up to meet her. She dragged, then carried the stranger down the steps, the lantern swinging in her hand. When his body hit the dirt floor, he didn't stir. The cellar smelled of dust and old wood, but it was hidden. It was dark. Mae sank down beside him, her arms shaking. For a long moment she did nothing but breathe, listening to the storm overhead. Rain on the roof sounded like forgiveness, or maybe a warning. "You'll be safe here," she whispered. "Just don't make a sound." He gave no answer. His face lay still, skin hot beneath the grime. Mae pressed the back of her hand to his forehead and felt the fever beating through him, fierce and relentless. The wind moaned through the boards. The house seemed to shudder. Mae looked at him again, the stranger whose life now rested in her hands. She didn't know his name, his past, what he had done to earn those scars. But she knew this: the world had already punished him enough. She soaked a rag in the last of her water and touched it to his lips. He drank weakly, the sound small and desperate. Mercy, she thought. Once given, it couldn't be taken back. For the first time in months, her hands trembled not from exhaustion, but from fear. The kind that comes when you finally decide to care again. She blew out the lantern, leaving them both in darkness. Above, she could hear the steady rhythm of her father's hammer wood on wood, mending fences, fixing what he could still control. He had no idea what she'd hidden beneath his feet. Hours slipped by. The storm faded, leaving only the scent of wet earth. Mae leaned her head against the wall, half asleep, half afraid of what morning would bring. When she woke, the cellar lay gray with dawn. Light seeped through the cracks in the floorboards. The stranger's eyes were open, dark, deep. Guarded the eyes of a man who knew trust was a luxury. They stared at each other for a long while. He tried to speak, but his voice broke. Water. Mae nodded, pressing the canteen to his mouth again. He drank more slowly this time, watching her over the rim. His eyes never left her. When he finally spoke, the word came rough and unsure. Why? Mae hesitated. There were 1,000 answers, and none. Because you needed help. He frowned as if the idea didn't fit. Then he lifted a hand, pointing upward toward the sound of boots creaking on the boards above. Your father, he said quietly. He knows. Mae shook her head. He let out a dry, bitter breath, and almost a laugh. You bring death here. No, she answered just as softly. I brought you life. He turned his face away, murmuring something low in his own language, a sound like wind slipping through reeds. She didn't understand the words. It didn't matter. The sound felt sacred anyway, like a prayer released into the air. What's your name? She asked. He hesitated, then spoke in a voice barely there. Ash. Ash. Mae repeated, slow, testing the weight of it. I'm Mae. He didn't say her name back, but something flickered across his face, a brief acknowledgement that she existed not as an enemy, but as someone who had crossed a line to reach him. In the days that followed, Mae moved through the house like a ghost, cooking, cleaning, acting as though nothing had changed. With a secret beating beneath the floorboards, she brought food down whenever her father was out mending fence lines. Bread, dried beans, a few scraps of meat. Each time Ash thanked her with a small nod. His English came broken, uneven, but his silence said enough. Sometimes she found him, awake, eyes tracing the cracks in the boards overhead, listening to a world he couldn't step into. When she asked if he wanted more food, more rest, more of anything, he only said, You risk much, Mae. She shrugged, though her hands still shook. Maybe I'm just tired of being afraid. He studied her, then spoke quietly. My people say hate is born from hunger. When the belly stays empty too long, the heart eats itself. The simplicity of it struck her harder than any sermon. Outside, thunder rolled again in the distance. But down in that cellar, for the first time in years, something small and human began to grow, a fragile mercy humming beneath the house. The days that followed were long and heavy, the kind that moved without kindness. Mornings smelled of dust and wood smoke. Evenings carried the ache of secrets. In the cellar, between earth and grain, the stranger slowly returned to life. Mae brought water at dawn and bread at dusk. Ash spoke little. His English came in fragments, rough and uncertain. Hers was no better in his tongue. Their language became something else, made of gestures, quiet looks, and a silence that told more truth than words ever could. When she handed him food, he nodded once, never taking more than he needed. When he drank, he cupped the tin with care, as if the water itself were holy. And when she tended his wounds, he turned his eyes away, not from shame, but respect. Above them, the world went on unchanged, suspicious and cruel. Every few evenings, hooves thundered past the house. Soldiers. Mae would freeze where she stood, needle or spoon suspended, listening to voices drift through the dry air. They were hunting an escaped Apache prisoner. Each time her stomach turned to ice, Caleb Rowan would stand on the porch watching the riders fade beyond the ridge. "Trouble's never far," he'd mutter. Mae, heart racing, would force a smile. "No, Pa, never is." But she felt his eyes on her longer these days, watching how she lingered near the house, how she avoided the open fields. The lies started small. "The fence needs fixing. The laundry isn't done. I've got bread rising." Each one burned a little hotter than the last. That night, Mae Rowan sat by the cellar door, long after her father had gone to bed, listening to the steady rise and fall of Ash's breathing below. The secret between them had a pulse now, alive, fragile, dangerous. When she finally went down, she found him sitting upright in the corner. Lantern light brushed his face with gold and shadow. A small knife worked in his hands, his movements slow and careful. She hesitated. "What are you making?" He looked up startled, then turned the piece of wood toward her. It was a small bird, wings spread, the shape rough but somehow alive, ready to lift off. "Bird," he said. Then after a pause, "Softer sparrow." Mae smiled faintly. "It's beautiful." He studied it a moment longer, then placed it in her hand. "It flies," he said, his voice quiet but sure, "even in dust." She turned it over, feeling the warmth of the wood where his fingers had been. Her throat tightened, though she couldn't say why, maybe because it was the first gentle thing she'd held in years. "Thank you," she whispered. Ash nodded once and went back to carving. The soft rasp of the blade filled the silence. That night, lying awake in her narrow bed, Mae held the little sparrow to her chest. Wind pressed against the house, whispering through the cracks like a restless spirit. She thought of her mother, Sarah Rowan, and the small tokens she used to leave on the windowsill. Shells, dried flowers, river, smoothed stones. "Beauty doesn't need much," her mother had once said. "Just a little light and someone to see it." The memory ached. In the days that followed, a fragile rhythm took shape between them. At sunrise, Ash would sit near the cracks in the floorboards, eyes closed, breathing in faint drafts as if feeling the world through wood and wind. Sometimes he hummed a low, wordless tune that sounded like running water. When Mae brought food, he'd say, "Thank you," in his rough accent. She'd answer softly, "You're welcome." Two small words became a bridge, uncertain but real. One evening, as the sky turned the color of rust and fire, Caleb Rowan came into the kitchen with his hat in hand. "You been down by the barn today?" he asked. "Not since morning," she said. Thought I saw tracks." Her heart stumbled. "Tracks. Boot prints," he muttered. "Bigger than yours." He studied her a long moment. "Maybe I'm seeing ghosts." When he left, Mae sank into a chair, shaking. That night she went to the cellar in near darkness, lantern low. Ash was awake, waiting. "He knows?" he asked quietly. "No," she whispered. "But he's looking." Ash met her gaze, calm and understanding. "Danger grows like roots underground," he said. "Then we'll keep it buried," she replied. He tilted his head, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "You have a strong heart." Mae smiled faintly. "It's stubborn, not strong." He shook his head. "Same thing." Outside wind swept through the grass, whispering through the cracks above them. They sat in silence for a long while, listening to a storm that never arrived. When Mae Rowan finally rose to leave, Ash reached to the small pouch at his neck and loosened a thin thread. He placed a sliver of cedar in her palm, carved this time with a single curved feather line. "For you?" he asked. "Another bird." A faint smile touched his mouth. "No, for courage." Mae took it, her fingers trembling just a little. "I'll keep it close." And she did. She wore it on a cord beneath her blouse, over her heart. Each time she lied to her father, she touched it for strength. Each time soldiers rode past, she felt its shape smooth and light, reminding her of the choice she'd made. The nights grew quieter. The fear didn't vanish. It changed shape, less sharp, more sacred. Mercy became her secret song, humming in her blood. Beneath the floorboards, in the stillness of the cellar, an outlaw's prayer braided with a widow's heartbeat. Two lonely languages, finally learning the same truth. The rain came at last. After months of dust and prayer and disappointment, the sky opened not gently, but with fury. It split wide like an old scar, the sound rolling across the prairie like a drumbeat of judgment. Inside the Rowan house, thunder rattled the windows. Water streamed down the glass in crooked rivers, washing drought-bitter soil clean. For the first time in a long while, Mae smiled at the sound. It meant the world could still give. Down in the cellar, the air turned cool and damp. Rain dripped steadily through the boards above, almost a song, a promise that maybe, just maybe, something could still grow. Ash sat near the wall, fixing a loose plank with an old hammer. Tap, tap, tap. The rhythm blended with the thunder overhead. Above them, the house groaned. Caleb Rowan had been restless all day, pacing porch to window, muttering under his breath. He never liked storms. They stirred what peace could not. When Mae came down with the lantern, her face glowed soft in the gold light. "You'll catch cold down here," she said. Ash looked up, half smiling. "Cold is honest," he replied. "Heat lies." She laughed quietly, shaking her head. "You've got a strange way of seeing the world. Only way that kept me alive." They shared a small silence, the kind that isn't empty, the kind that listens. Then through the storm's roar came a sound neither expected. Bootsteps. Slow, deliberate, heavy. Mae froze the lantern, trembling in her hand. Before she could move, the cellar door creaked open. A blade of light spilled down the stairs, sharp and blinding. Caleb Rowan stood in the doorway, lantern held high, his face carved from stone. Every line told a story of loss. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. The storm breathed through the cracks as his gaze moved from Mae to the man beside her. Ash had risen to his feet, the hammer still in his hand. His body tensed, not in defiance, but by instinct, the way a cornered man stands before fate. Caleb Rowan's voice came rough and low. "God help me, Mae. You brought one into my home." Her mouth went dry. She stepped between them, hands raised. Her voice shook. "Pa! Listen! Don't touch me!" he snapped. "Do you know what this means? You've lost your damn mind!" Lantern light shuddered across the damp walls. "He's not your enemy," Mae said, her voice lifting. "He's a man." Caleb's jaw tightened. "He's the reason we bury men like your brother." The words cracked like a whip. For a moment, Mae didn't see her father at all. She saw a soldier again, haunted by ghosts he could never lay to rest. Thunder slammed overhead, dust falling from the rafters, the smell of wet earth flooding the cellar. Ash said nothing. He stood still, dark eyes calm, as if he'd been waiting for this moment all along. "He's hurt," Mae said softer now. "He would have died out there. He should have Caleb shot back. That's the Lord's work, not yours." Another flash of lightning split the space between them, and in that white glare, Mae saw the fear beneath her father's anger, the fear of losing her too. He lowered the lantern slowly. His voice broke. "You'll bring ruin on us both." Then he turned and climbed the stairs. "Pa!" she cried. He didn't stop. Through the rain came the slam of the door, the jangle of reins, the thunder of hooves, fading into the storm. He was riding to the fort. The moment stretched thin, fragile as glass. Ash let out a slow breath. He goes for them. Mae's heart hammered. She stared at the open cellar door, rain slanting in like needles. "We have to leave," she whispered. Ash shook his head. "No place to go. Every road ends in a rope." "Then we take the one they won't follow," she said fiercely. He met her eyes. The defiance there reminded him of fire caught in a windstorm, shaking but refusing to die. Lightning flashed again, lighting the mud-slick world outside. "He'll bring soldiers before dawn," she said. "If we're here, we're dead." Ash hesitated, then nodded once. "We leave." They gathered what little they could, a blanket, the last of the bread, a few drops of water. When Mae reached for the sparrow carving on the shelf, Ash stopped her. "Keep it," he said. "It flies even in dust." The words steadied her hands. Rain fell harder, soaking her dress as they stepped into the night. Wind clawed at them. The sky burned white with lightning. They crossed the field as mud swallowed their tracks. The storm became their ally, each thunderclap masking their steps, each gust scouring their trail. Behind them, the house stood dark against the horizon, the only home Mae had ever known, and the one she could never return to. At the ridge, she turned once. Through sheets of rain, she saw the faint glow of her father's lantern moving across the plains, small, distant, determined. He would not stop. Mae gripped Ash's arm. Her voice was barely a whisper beneath the storm. "He's gone for them, I know." "Then we run," Ash said. They did into the black, the rain, the unknown. Thunder rolled behind them, like the voice of God himself, warning morning, bearing witness. And somewhere beneath that sound, between lightning and wind, Mae Rowan felt the truth settle into her bones. The storm was no longer only in the sky. It lived inside her now, roaring and alive, impossible to stop. Mercy had named its price, and she had chosen to pay it. By the time they reached the dry creek bed, the rain had softened to a hush. Heat rose from the ground after the storm, and the world smelled of mud, sage, and fear. Mae's boots sank into the loosened earth as she helped Ash down the slope. The creek cut a narrow scar through the land deep enough to hide them for a while. The air hung heavy thick with the kind of silence that comes before a reckoning. They didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. Above them, thunder drifted east, carrying away the last of their shelter. Then the wind shifted. It brought something sharper. Hoofbeats. At first distant, then louder, closer. The sound of pursuit. Mae's breath caught. Ash stopped, head tilting as he listened. "Riders," he said quietly. She turned toward the dark ridge, heart slamming. Through the rain haze, faint lights bobbed, lanterns swinging from saddles. The Federal riders were coming hard, cutting through mud and storm like hounds on a scent. Ash reached for her arm. "Go," he said. "Hide." She shook her head, gripping his wrist with trembling hands. "No, not without you." "They come for me," he said, "not for you. Then they'll have to take us both." Her voice broke, but her eyes held steady. Ash looked at her for a long moment, rain tracing dark lines down his face. He had seen death too many times, yet something in her defiance left him unsteady. The hoofbeats thundered closer. The riders were almost upon them now. Torchlight painted the trees gold and red, like a forest burning. Ash stepped away. "No fight," he whispered. "No more running. Don't," she pleaded. "They'll kill you." "Then I'll be standing," he said softly, "not hiding." Mae's tears mixed with rain. "Please, Ash." He turned to her one last time. "You gave me life when the world gave me chains," he said. "Now let me give you peace." The riders burst into view. Caleb Rowan at their front rifle raised his face pale under the lightning. 2 Federal riders flanked him, horses tearing up wet earth. "Stop where you are," one shouted. Ash lifted his hands slowly, palms open. He stood tall against the storm's fading light, proud, still, unarmed. "I surrender," he said. "No fight." Caleb pulled his horse short, breathing hard, eyes darting from the Apache to his daughter. "Mae, get away from him." She didn't move. She went to Ash's side and clung to his arm. "If you take him," she said through the rain, "you take me too." Her father's voice cracked. "You don't know what you're saying." "Yes, I do." She faced him, dress plastered to her skin, hair stuck to her cheeks. You once told me mercy could hang me. Then let it. I won't watch them drag another soul into the ground. The soldiers traded uneasy looks as rain whispered around them. One muttered, "She's mad." The other spat into the mud, "Or in love." Caleb Rowan's grip on the rifle wavered. His eyes met Mae's, and for the first time he didn't see the little girl who had followed him through drought and death. He saw a woman who had found her own kind of faith. Lightning tore the sky open, bleaching the world white. In that flash he saw Sarah Rowan again, the same eyes, the same fire. He lowered the rifle. His voice came rough, hollow. He broke into my cellar, he told the soldiers. I was bringing him in myself. The girl she didn't know. The younger rider frowned. That's not what she's saying. Caleb shot him a glare. You want paperwork, he said, or you want a prisoner? The man hesitated, then nodded to his partner. They dismounted, binding Ash's wrists with wet rope. Mae tried to hold on, but Ash stepped back gently. It's all right, he whispered. No, she said. It's not. You kept your promise, he answered softly. You gave me life. Now let me keep mine. He met her eyes one last time. In them she saw quiet acceptance, the strange peace that only those who've carried too much suffering ever find. They led him to a horse, hands bound back straight. He didn't fight. He didn't beg. Caleb turned to his daughter, voice raw. Inside, before you ruin us both. Mae didn't move. She stood as the riders pulled away, Ash's silhouette thinning in the stormlight rain, blurring him into the horizon. When the last hoofbeat faded, she sank to her knees. In the mud, the sparrow carving clenched in her hand. Rain traced her face, and the world fell quiet again. It was the kind of heartbreak that didn't scream. It hollowed you out until you were nothing but ache. She stared at the little wooden bird in her palm, its wings slick with rain. You said it flies even in dust, she whispered. Then fly now. Please, fly to him. Her father stood behind her, silent, the rifle hanging limp in his hand. For once, even he had no words left. The storm had broken, but what it left behind would take a lifetime to mend. The narrator voice soft and nearly breaking ends. Some loves are born in silence and die in thunder, but its echo never leaves the land. Rain kept falling steady and endless, washing away tracks, blood lies. Somewhere in the distance, beneath a sky split by lightning, a man rode bound but unbroken, carrying the sound of her voice and the mercy that had changed them both. Fort Stanton stood like a scar on the horizon, walls of sun-bleached timber flags, drooping in the heat iron and sweat thick in the air. The men there were tired men who'd forgotten what mercy felt like. By noon the rain had burned away, leaving the sky cruel again, blue and unforgiving. When Mae Rowan rode through the gate, her dress still stained with mud, the fort guards turned to stare. She didn't flinch. I need to see your commanding officer, she said. The older guard frowned. This ain't visiting hours, ma'am. It's not a visit, Mae replied. It's a confession. That was enough to make them listen. Inside the fort reeked of tobacco ink and the crushing weight of order. Behind a scarred desk sat Ethan Crow, a captain whose face had learned obedience too well. His uniform was pressed, his eyes dull as river stones. He didn't look up when he spoke. State your business. It's about the Apache you captured last night. His head lifted slow and measured. You mean the prisoner awaiting execution? Mae Rowan's heart stumbled, but she straightened her spine. That man is my husband. The words split the room like a rifle shot. The captain froze. The pen in his hand stopped mid-stroke. Then he laughed, once short, humorless. Your husband? Yes, sir. We were married in Green River, before all this. He leaned back, studying her face. That's a dangerous lie to tell, miss. It's not a lie, Mae said, her voice shaking but firm. If being married to him saves his life, then it's the truest thing I've ever said. Silence pressed in heavy electric. The clerk in the corner paused his writing. A guard shifted his boots. Even the captain's breathing slowed. "You do realize," Crow said at last, "that aiding a fugitive is a hanging offense." "Then hang me," Mae answered. "But you'll have to hang a wife beside her husband." The captain's jaw tightened. "I don't make the laws, ma'am. I enforce them." "Then maybe the law forgot how to be human," she said softly. Before he could answer, the door opened. Caleb Rowan stepped inside, hat in hand, mud still clinging to his boots. His face was gray with guilt and sleepless nights. "Lord help me, girl," he muttered. "What have you done now?" The captain gestured to him. "You're her kin, her father. Good. Maybe you can talk sense into her. She claims the Apache is her husband." Caleb's eyes flicked to his daughter, then back to the officer. He swallowed. "She's young," he said quietly. "Doesn't see the world the way it is." Mae turned to him, voice breaking. "Pa, please, tell them he's no killer. Tell them what you saw." Caleb looked at her for a long moment without speaking. Behind his silence lay the weight of every choice he'd ever made, the ones that kept him alive and the ones that stole his peace. Finally he said, He broke into my cellar. I was bringing him in myself." He paused. "But my daughter's not wrong about one thing. He didn't raise a weapon. Could have. Didn't. Maybe that counts for something." The captain sighed, rubbing his temples. Not enough to set him free. Mae stepped forward, her voice sharp now. "Then take me instead. If you want a hanging, hang me too. I saved him, and I'd do it again." Even Caleb flinched at that. The captain's eyes softened, just a fraction like a man hearing a hymn he'd forgotten. He stood, palms on the desk. "You realize what you're asking." "I'm asking for justice," Mae said. "Or mercy. Whichever still lives here." Crow studied her for a long, unblinking moment. Then he turned to Caleb. "You willing to vouch for this marriage?" Caleb hesitated. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. "If I say no?" "What happens?" "She hangs as an accomplice," the captain said. "The Apache dies at dawn." The old man stared at the floor. Caleb Rowan's shoulders shook. Then he lifted his head, eyes wet and worn. "Then I'll vouch," he said. "The marriage stands." "By my word." Mae gasped, but he wouldn't meet her eyes. Ethan Crow nodded slowly. "Very well. The court recognizes the union. The prisoner's life is bound to hers. He will serve under your supervision, Mr. Rowan, as labor, not a free man." The room let out a breath. The clerk bent back to his papers. The world began to move again. The captain turned away, muttering, "In a land of dust and judgment, sometimes one word, husband, is enough to change the wind." Outside, the sun burned high over the fort walls. And somewhere in the holding yard, Ash lifted his head, sensing the shift before he understood it. Spring came early that year. The storms passed, and the land began to breathe again. Grass returned in pale whispers. The air lost its bitterness. For the first time in years, the wind carried the faint smell of life. At the Rowan homestead, days settled into a new rhythm. Silence remained, but it no longer held only grief. It carried change. Ash rose before dawn and worked with a steadiness that felt like prayer. His scarred brown hands turned soil-mended fences, hauled stone. He wasted no words and no motion. Each strike of the shovel seemed to wake the land. Caleb watched from a distance at first. The porch, the barn, the far edges of the field. His face stayed guarded, but his eyes tracked every move Ash made. Mae noticed the differences, how her father no longer muttered when Ash passed, how his jaw didn't clench quite so hard. Something in him was easing, though he would never admit it. One morning she found them by the old well, standing shoulder to shoulder without speaking. Caleb squinted toward the horizon, where a thin trickle seeped from the rocks. "You sure about that vein?" he asked, voice rough. Ash knelt, pressing his palm to the damp earth. "It runs deep," he said. like truth. You don't always see it, but it's there. Caleb didn't answer. But that evening, Mae saw him leave a clean shirt folded on Ash's cot. He said nothing. Ash didn't thank him. Some understandings didn't need words. Days grew long and full. The three of them worked side by side beneath open sky, each learning the other's silences. At supper, they sat at the same table, Caleb at the head, Mae beside him, Ash across. The first time no one spoke for several minutes. Then Caleb poured whiskey into 3 cups and lifted his own. To hard work, he said, voice low and awkward. Mae smiled. To second chances. Ash raised his cup, last meeting both their eyes. To water that does not run dry. The clink of tin sounded like a promise. As days turned into weeks, the earth seemed to heal with them. Ash coaxed green shoots from stubborn soil, repaired the barn roof, cleaned the troughs, and uncovered a faint spring on the north slope, hidden beneath rock and time. When he called Mae to see it, she knelt beside the thin stream water, flashing in the sun. She laughed, the sound breaking the air like music. I didn't think this land had any kindnesses left, she said. Ash smiled faintly. The earth remembers kindness, he said. It gives back when it's ready. Mae Rowan looked at him, then realizing he wasn't only talking about soil. That evening, as the sun bled across the hills, Caleb Rowan joined them by the barn. He leaned against the fence pipe in hand, eyes tired but softer than they'd been in years. Never thought I'd see this place bloom again, he said. It just needed someone to listen, Mae replied. Caleb studied Ash for a long moment. You talk to the ground like it can hear you. It can, Ash said. It hears everything. Caleb grunted, half a laugh, half disbelief. Maybe so. They stood together in quiet, watching the sky turn red and gold, the new water catching light like glass. That night, after chores were finished, they shared supper again. The fire cracked, throwing long shadows across the kitchen walls. The air felt lighter, as if the house itself had begun to forgive. Caleb poured another round of whiskey. He didn't look at Ash when he spoke. You work hard. Work keeps a man honest, Ash answered. You think so, I know so. The old man nodded slowly. Guess that makes 2 of us. For a long while, the only sound was rain dripping from the gutter and wind brushing the porch. Mae watched the 2 men, one who had lost everything to hate, and one who had survived everything through grace, and saw something shift between them. Not friendship, not yet, but the start of understanding. When the meal ended, Caleb stood and walked to the door. You'll want to see the sunrise tomorrow, he said gruffly. The kind we used to have before the drought. He stepped into the dark, leaving them in the quiet warmth of firelight. Mae turned to Ash. He stared into the flames, eyes calm. Do you believe it? She asked. What, that the world can change? He looked at her, voice soft but certain. The world doesn't change, Mae. People do, and the land follows. She smiled, tracing the grain of the wooden sparrow she still kept near the window. Then maybe this land is learning again. Ash nodded once, gaze distant firelight flickering in his eyes. Outside, the wind rose gently, carrying the smell of sage and water through the open door. Mae closed her eyes and whispered almost to herself. The world can hate us if it wants. The land doesn't. And for the first time since the drought began, she meant it. The house felt alive again, not because the past was forgotten, but because it was forgiven. The ground beneath them, cracked and scarred, was learning to heal. And so were they. By late summer, peace had grown fragile, too quiet, too good to last. Rumors drifted across the prairie like dust on wind. They said the army was gathering the freed Apache prisoners, reclaiming men once spared. At first, Caleb ignored the talk. But when riders appeared on the far ridge, blue coats flashing in the sun, he knew the storm had found them again. Ethan Crow dismounted by the porch, his face cut from stone, his voice dry as paper. Orders from Washington. Every freed man returns to custody. No exceptions. Caleb stood on the porch steps, one hand on the rail, wind tugging at his coat. Mae stood behind him. Ash stood beside her. The old man's voice came low and steady. "You'll have to shoot me first." Ethan Crow looked up startled. Years had worn down some of his edges, but not enough to dull the shock of open defiance. "You know I can't do that." "Then you can't take him either," Caleb Rowan said. "He's worked this land, bled for it. Same as me. He's no fugitive. He's family." The silence between them stretched thin as wire. The other federal riders shifted in their saddles. Crow rubbed his jaw, eyes tired, and let out a long, weary breath. "Keep him," he said quietly. "But if Washington asks, he's dead." He turned his horse without another word. The others followed their shadows thinning into the pale horizon. When they were gone, the wind returned soft, forgiving. Caleb looked at the two standing before him, sunlight painting their faces gold. He nodded once. "Then let's make it true in every way that matters." That night they prepared nothing. No lace, no preacher, no witnesses but dawn. The earth would be their church. When morning came, the sky was clear and kind. The air smelled of wet sage and new grass. The well rope creaked, lifting a bucket of the cleanest water the land had seen in years. Caleb stood beside it with his Bible in trembling hands. Eyes once hard as flint had gone gentle. Mae Rowan wore her mother, Sarah Rowan's, faded blue dress. Ash waited beside her, a carved sparrow tied to his wrist with a piece of string. Caleb's voice shook, but it carried. "By the laws of this land and the grace of the Almighty," he said, "I declare you husband and wife. May you always find water when the world runs dry." Mae took Ash's hands, strong, warm, a promise in themselves. For a moment none of them spoke. The wind stirred alive and easy, brushing the tall grass. A faint wooden flute drifted on the air. Ash's melody, the same tune he'd once hummed in a dark cellar, now lifting into open sky. The wind that once carried fear whispered peace. Caleb looked out across the hills and said softly, "Guess the land chose right after all." As the sun climbed higher, gilding the world, the three of them stood together, no longer bound by fear or law, but by something stronger. Something the earth itself seemed to know. Narrator mercy isn't weakness. It's the sound the soul makes when it remembers what it's for. And if this story touched your heart tonight, my friends, tell me where you're listening from in the comments below. I'd love to know what this tale meant to you and what stayed with your soul the longest. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss another story where the wind still carries the voices of the Old West and every act of mercy still echoes across the land. All stories are created for entertainment purposes and may include fictional elements or dramatized interpretations inspired by historical settings. We use AI tools, voiceover visuals, scripts as creative assistants. However, all content is reviewed, refined, and edited by humans to ensure emotional authenticity and storytelling quality. We fully comply with YouTube's policies regarding AI-generated content and do not use any deepfake techniques or misleading recreations of real individuals. All visuals and supporting materials are properly licensed. Sharing, re-uploading, modifying, or distributing any part of this content in any form requires written permission. We appreciate your support and respect for original creative work.